We celebrate today the feast of Saint Francis Xavier, who was one of the first companions of Saint Ignatius when the Society of Jesus was founded. Francis Xavier was born in the year 1506 and died in the year 1552 after a brief 46 years of life. He was known as a saint in a hurry, not only because he wanted to do things quickly, but because he was also always available to whatever God wanted him to do. And for Francis Xavier, God spoke to his mentor, Ignatius. Initially, it was not Francis Xavier who was supposed to come to what was then known as the Indies. It was another Jesuit, Bobadilla. However, Bobadilla fell ill, and though some might say it was chance that Francis Xavier came to India, that is not so. It was providence. It was God's will, because with God there is no chance. God is always in control. And so it was that Ignatius approached Francis Xavier after the illness of Bobadilla and asked whether he would go. And because Francis wanted to be available to whatever his mentor, speaking on behalf of God, wanted him to do, Francis Xavier set out in the year 1541 and took more than a year to reach the shores of Goa. He reached Goa in May 1542. And for 10 years, he missioned in Goa, in Kerala, in Japan, and finally died on the island of Sanxian with his sights set on China. Francis Xavier has got a number of beautiful qualities that we can emulate. And out of those qualities, I will choose 4 for our reflection today. The first of these is the enthusiasm of Francis Xavier. There was never a time in the life of Francis Xavier when physical tiredness would deter him from doing something. He was always enthusiastic about whatever he did, whether it was teaching children about the love of God, whether it was building universities, whether it was building other places of worship. Francis Xavier was enthusiastic about everything he did. From the moment he woke up in the morning, his prayer was for the same grace that this enthusiasm would not let him down, and it did not let him down until the end of his life. He continued to be as enthusiastic in the Indies as he was when he was called by his mentor Ignatius. The second quality of Francis Xavier is his optimism. Francis Xavier was able to recognize that God worked in every single situation, and he was able to find God in all things and all things in God. And that is why when Francis Xavier looked, he looked with a positive vision. When Francis Xavier saw people, he saw only what would enhance them, what would build them up, what would be leading to grace from God to them. Francis Xavier never had a pessimistic bone in his body, and so therefore, whenever he spoke, it was words which built up, words which enhanced, words which helped people to know that they were loved and they were regarded. He always looked at the positive side of things because he knew that it was God who would work at every single moment, and nothing was beyond the purview of God. The third quality of Francis Xavier that we can reflect on is his faith. Faith has been defined in the letter to the Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1 as the conviction of things not seen and the assurance of things hoped for. In the Gospel of Mark chapter 11 verses 22 to 25, when Jesus speaks about faith, he tells his disciples that they must believe even before they can see. The larger majority of us want to see, and only then will we believe. Francis Xavier emulated the faith of his Lord and was able to believe even before he saw. Francis Xavier had faith which could move mountains. His faith was such a faith that in the moment he began a work, he knew that he would be able to complete it because of his own talents and abilities, yes, but also because of his confidence, of his trust, of his faith in God. And finally, we can talk about the perseverance, the persistence, the never giving up of Francis Xavier. Perseverance is such a difficult thing today. We can begin well, we can begin and continue for some time, but there are times in our lives when we tend to give up, when we tend to give in because things do not work according to plan. In the life of Francis Xavier, many of the things that he did not work according to plan, but because he was able to know that God was in control, and because he was gifted with this gift of perseverance, of never giving up, he never gave up. Francis Xavier is inviting us today to emulate at least these 4 of his qualities. We need to ask ourselves whether we are willing to draw from the strength that God gives us, and also emulate first his enthusiasm. No matter what work we are engaged in, no matter what ministry we are engaged in, no matter what our state in life, if we can be enthusiastic about life, because we never know what the next moment might bring. And that is why it is wonderful to be enthusiastic about everything and anything we are doing. Can we look at a white wall and focus on the white wall and not on the small black spot on the white wall? Can we be optimistic? Can we look at things positively? Can we look at persons positively? Can we look at situations positively? Can we have faith which asks us to believe not only before we see, but also asks us to believe when we cannot see, to believe when our plans go awry, to believe when things do not work out according to the way we want them to work out? We know that God is still in control. And finally, will we never ever give up once we begin? Jesus says so often in the Gospels that anyone who puts their hand to the plow and looks behind is not worthy of the kingdom of God. And so he calls for perseverance, he calls for persistence, he calls us to say we will never give up, we will never give in, we will never say die. The gospel text chosen for the feast is from the Gospel of Luke chapter 10 verses 1 to 6, in which Jesus sends his disciples out on mission. And even as Jesus sends the larger group of 70 out on mission, he gives them a strategy. And this strategy which Jesus gives may be summarized in one word, and that word is detachment. Francis Xavier had learned the art of detachment. He had learned the art of putting himself fully into the work that he was doing and leaving the result in God's hands. Francis Xavier was so focused on what had to be done that he never cared about what would happen after his action, because he was aware that God would see the action through. Today, as we celebrate the feast of Francis Xavier, let us hear the Lord call us to this detachment. Detachment from things which hold us back from love. Detachment from persons if they hold us back from love. Detachment from negative situations if they hold us back from love. A very happy feast of Francis Xavier.